let's talk about something that's too important to ignore. Something that affects not only Ukraine or Russia, but the entire world. Something that challenged the very notion of what global leadership, freedom, and alliances mean in the 21st century. Let's talk about the war in Ukraine, and why how we respond isn't just about Ukraine or Russia or Europe, it's about whether the free world still knows how to stand up and say, enough. First, let's establish a painfully obvious truth. Russia is not our friend. I know some people like to pretend otherwise. They like to act like we can negotiate with Vladimir Putin, like we're dealing with a misunderstood strongman who just wants a seat at the global table. Let's get real. Putin invaded Ukraine because he believes it never should have been independent in the first place. He sees Ukraine not as a neighbor, not as a sovereign state, but as a piece of territory that slipped through his fingers when the Soviet Union collapsed. He wants it back, and not through diplomacy, not through compromise, through war. Russia didn't start this war because they were threatened by NATO. They didn't start this war because of some defensive maneuver. They started it because Putin is an imperialist who told his people and the world that Ukraine was ruled by neo-Nazis committing genocide against Russian-speaking people in the Donbass. There's zero evidence for this claim. Zero. It's propaganda designed to mask a land grab. Putin wanted the war first. He came up with the excuse later. So what did the West do? The United States and our European allies, wisely, chose not to put boots on the ground and risk direct war with a nuclear-armed country. Instead, we supported Ukraine with weapons, intelligence, and aid. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast enough, but it mattered, and it gave Ukraine the tools to fight back. In the first 6 to 12 months of this war, Russia made serious gains. They swept through territory moving fast, expecting Ukraine to collapse in weeks. But the Ukrainian people, not just career soldiers, but regular people, they fought back. They clawed back half the territory that Russia had captured, town by town, block by block. And now, for the past 2 years, it's been a grind, a stalemate. Russians take a village, Ukrainians take it back. The front lines shift, but no one is making any major gains. Here's the part Putin doesn't want anyone to talk about. Russia is losing. Not on a map, but economically, militarily, strategically, they're bleeding out. Let's take a look at this. Over 1 million Russian casualties. They're military losses that they can't afford to replace. They're digging up tanks from the 1950s just to keep the fight going. Ukrainian forces are blowing up Russian military equipment faster than Russia can build or buy replacements. And Russia is using donkeys, literal donkeys, to carry supplies to the front line because they don't have enough trucks. That's not a war machine. That's a collapsing empire. And then there's the economy. Russia has been sanctioned so heavily, even if not as thoroughly as they could be, that they're barely keeping their airline industry afloat. They're smuggling airplane parts through the black market, paying 3 or 4 times the price. And their oil exports, the lifeblood of their economy, are under siege. Their defense industry, once a major source of cash, is crumbling. Meanwhile, to keep the war going, Russia's paying soldiers 2 to 3 times more than civilians. And what happens when people abandon their jobs for the battlefield? Civilian wages have to rise, production slows, inflation spikes. That's not just a wartime inconvenience, that's the foundation for an economic collapse. And it gets worse for them. Russia used to sell military equipment all around the world, and that's over now. Why? Because they don't have any left to sell. Ukraine is blowing them up before they ever even leave the warehouse. Meanwhile, Ukraine is holding steady. Their economy has taken a hit, no doubt, but it's surviving. They're innovating. They've embraced drone warfare like no other country in the world, and US defense analysts are studying them like they're the new textbook. Support is flowing from allies, especially the Eastern European nations who remember Soviet occupation all too well. Poland, the Baltics, countries that know what it means when Russia comes knocking. They've stepped up, not because they want war, but because they know exactly what losing to Putin means. And on the other side of the chessboard, Russia is getting help from our enemies. China, North Korea, Iran. That's the company that Putin is keeping. And the world is watching how the United States responds, especially China, because Taiwan is their next move. So let's ask the big question. If the US doesn't stand with Ukraine, if we show the world that we'll back down when democracy is under attack, do you really think China won't take the hint? What would stop them from invading Taiwan? Now, let's talk about Trump. Trump said that he could end this war in a single day, because as he loves to say, he's a great negotiator. But here's what's actually happening. Every time Trump proposes a ceasefire, Putin moves the goalposts. There's always one more thing that he wants. He's not negotiating in good faith. Why should he? He's losing badly, and dictators don't survive when they lose wars. Just ask Russian history. Because Russia has a pattern. And Putin? He knows that pattern all too well. So let's run a tape. Let's go back to 1905. Russia decides to pick a fight with Japan. A rising empire, sure, but a non-European power. The Tsar thought it would be an easy win. Instead, it was a total disaster. Russia loses the Russo-Japanese War, and not just on the battlefield. This wasn't some minor border skirmish. This was Russia being humiliated on the world stage. It was the first time an Asian power defeated a major European empire in modern warfare. It shattered the illusion of Russian military dominance. And at home, the people snapped. The loss triggered the 1905 Russian Revolution. Mass strikes, protests, mutinies. Workers took to the streets. The Navy rebelled. Assassinations spiked. The Tsar, freaked out and desperate, was forced to sign the October Manifesto, creating a parliament, the Duma, just to calm things down. It was the beginning of the end for autocratic Tsarist rule. The seeds of revolution were planted, all because of a war Russia thought they'd win. Fast forward to World War I. Russia goes in big, millions of soldiers, national pride on the line. And once again, crushing defeat. Russian armies were slaughtered on the Eastern Front. They were outgunned, undertrained, and poorly supplied. Soldiers were being sent into battle without rifles. Their instructions? Pick one up off a dead comrade. Yeah, that bad. The Russian economy was buckling. Inflation soared. Food shortages devastated the cities. The people were starving while the Tsar and his inner circle fiddled away in palaces. And then came 1917. First, the February Revolution. The Tsar abdicates. The Romanov dynasty, which ruled for over 300 years, is done. Then the October Revolution. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seize power. Civil war follows. The monarchy is executed. The Russian Empire is dead. And out of its ashes rises something new. The Soviet Union. And what triggered this collapse? Losing the war. Again. Now let's jump to the 1980s. The Soviet Union gets cocky and invades Afghanistan. They thought it would be a quick intervention, a clean occupation, another win for the Red Army. It turned into their Vietnam. The Soviets were stuck in a brutal, grinding guerrilla war against a population that didn't want them there. The Mujahideen fought with passion, with US-supplied weapons, and with a homeland advantage. It dragged on for 10 years. Tens of thousands of soldiers died. Billions of rubles were poured into a losing war. And when they finally pulled out in 1989, humiliated and drained? Boom. The Soviet economy was in tatters. Public trust in the Communist Party was collapsing. Nationalist movements across Eastern Europe were gaining steam. Within 2 years, the Berlin Wall falls, the Warsaw Pact disintegrates, and the USSR collapses. One war, one loss, one domino after another until a global superpower ceased to exist. And Putin? He was there. He watched it fall. He was a KGB officer stationed in East Germany when the Berlin Wall came down. One day he had power, status, a nation that feared him. The next, nothing. He said publicly that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He doesn't want to repeat that. He can't afford to, because in Russia, when the military fails, the system collapses. Every single time. So when we say that Putin can't lose in Ukraine, it's not just political, it's existential. He knows that a military failure could be a crack in the dam, the one that lets the flood in, the end of his regime, the collapse of the oligarchy, the rise of rebellion. That's why he's drafted hundreds of thousands of more troops. That's why he's sacrificing his economy, his future, his people, just to keep the illusion of progress alive. Because if he loses this war, history tells us exactly what comes next. And trust me, he knows it too. Losing wars is existential for Russia. Every time they lose, their system breaks, their leaders fall, their society implodes. So no, Putin cannot afford to lose, not just politically, but personally. That's why he's drafted another 130,000 people to expand his army. That's why he refuses to accept any peace that looks like a loss. And on the other side, the Ukrainians have made it clear they would rather die than live under Russian rule again. They spent a century under the thumb of Moscow. They know what that means. They're not going back. So again, what does Trump think he can offer both sides? Ukrainians won't surrender. Putin can't admit defeat. And Trump? He can't use tariffs. Russia's already been sanctioned into oblivion. He can't send weapons to Ukraine. He called that stupid and a waste of American money. So what does he do? Nothing, because every option that could have worked, he's already ruled out. Meanwhile, Ukraine is asking for one thing, a security guarantee. That means NATO. But Trump wants to pull out of NATO, which would completely undercut any hope of lasting peace. NATO is the only thing that could prevent another war with Russia. It's the only thing that would make a peace deal stick, and Trump wants to leave it. That's not just short-sighted, that's dangerous. And the EU knows it too. That's why they're rearming, and they're not buying American weapons, because we've made it clear we're no longer reliable. They're investing in their own industries, their own defenses, and their own futures. But here's the contradiction. Trump wants the EU to trust him enough to support his peace plan, while pulling out of NATO, undercutting their security, and blaming them for defending themselves. That's not leadership. That's chaos. Trump pressured NATO countries for years to spend more on defense, calling them freeloaders, saying that they relied too much on the US military and that America was being taken advantage of. So Europe says, okay, fine. We'll start building up our own defense capabilities. And then what happened? Trump got mad that Europe wasn't buying enough American-made weapons to do it. Instead, the EU began investing in their own domestic defense industries, which actually makes a lot of sense if they think the US might ditch them. Trump blaming NATO, that's not leadership. That's setting the house on fire and then yelling at your neighbors for buying their own extinguisher. If you're asking Europe to help enforce peace, they need to believe you're actually in the fight, not packing your bags and telling Putin to do whatever he wants if they don't cough up enough money. You can't demand unity while actively torching the alliance that holds it together. Now Europe's rearming, not to spite the US, but because Trump made it clear they can't count on us. They're investing in their own defense, building domestic weapons industries, and planning for a future where America might walk away. And then Trump gets mad that they're not buying American arms. It's a Hall of Mirrors contradiction. He undermines their security, then complains when they try to secure themselves. He's trying to bluff his way to peace, but you can't bluff when nobody at the table believes you'll back your own bet. And Putin knows exactly how to call it. If Trump wants to end the war, he needs EU support. But the EU won't back a treaty unless it ensures Ukraine's long-term security. That means NATO. That means American leadership. And that means reliability, not bluster. And right now, Trump has cut off every option that could have actually ended this war. He's backed himself into a corner. He can't threaten Russia. He can't support Ukraine. He can't rally the EU. He can't offer real peace. And so the war continues, while he shouts from the sidelines, pretending he has a solution. But we don't need fantasy. We need facts. We need strategy. We need allies. We need leadership. This war won't be won with tweets or slogans or empty promises about ending it in a day. It will be won with resolve, with unity, with an understanding that freedom, real freedom, has to be defended, even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient. Because if we don't stand up now, then who will stand with us when our turn comes?